welcome to Calgary and the 2016 WRLA show. We weren't able to attend your keynote this morning, but are there three takeaways that you would say you have that people could take away?
Mm-hmm. I think with this whole issue of Generation Y and why it's so challenging for leaders today and managers, regardless of really your industry, is the fact that often managers think that younger workers should come into their workplace and basically become little mini me's of them and start doing things exactly the way they do things and seeing the situation exactly like they do. But the challenge is with intergenerational understanding is that people don't just grow up and become identical to the generation that's immediately older than them. So that's one of the challenges for leaders, is to be able to step back and say, okay, I see the world this way. This is how I hatched into the workplace. And my staff, who might be 20 years younger than me, hatched into the workplace in a different way, and their beliefs and values might be quite different than mine, and I'm not going to be able to convert them, and they're not going to be able to convert me. So I need to find a way that I can lead them really effectively so that I'm not having a churning door where I attract people, they don't stay very long, and then I'm rehiring, retraining, and associated costs that relate to that. So I think that that's really probably the number one thing, is understanding I need to realize that it's not about changing people all the time. I think the second thing is to really understand how the four generational groups are different and what their beliefs and values are and what motivates them individually. And so, for example, Gen Y out of the four generational groups are the most motivated by time off. So where you have boomers and Gen X's might say, well, you know what, I can work extra overtime, why wouldn't I? And a Gen Y might say, why would I? And so again, it's getting out of your own mind belief pieces. And I think the third thing that is important to take away, if there was only three things to take away from this morning, is if you're working with someone who is a generation different than you either way, so if I'm working with someone who is my dad's age, and if something that person does that reminds me of something my dad would say, is not to say, oh, my dad would say that. Or the flip side, if I'm working with someone who's young enough to be my nephew, to say, oh, my nephew would do that, is because then you're bringing personal relationships into the business relationship, and that muddies the water. If someone is old enough to be in the workplace, they're old enough to be treated as a colleague, and if they're still young enough to be in the workplace, they're young enough to be treated as a colleague and not those familial type relationships.
That was excellent. What are some of the other challenges that you see today's leaders facing?
Well, I think particularly with the generational piece, it's because this generation is coming into the workplace without necessarily the independent skill sets that the generations before had, and that's due to them helicopter parenting. It's due to primarily not learning those skills by free play, because this is the first generation that all their sports were very much, you're playing hockey, here's your role, here's the rules, here's what you do, instead of here, go play, and you figure out what all that is. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges. I think leadership is always challenging. Our workplaces are becoming more and more diverse, and leaders need to adjust how they're seeing things instead of just saying, you need to be like me to be successful here. Leaders need to say, I need to understand how they see the world so that I can maximize their productivity and their motivation.
Would you be able to share a piece of leadership advice that you've received over your career?
I think the number one thing is to really step out of your ego. And you might be the leader, you might be the manager, but if you want people to want to work for you, you have to put their interests equal to your interests and it not be all about you if you want that long-term relationship where people go that extra mile for you as a leader.
What's one thing that you see leaders doing today that you think you need to stop doing this, stop doing this practice?
Short-term thinking. I think that any workplace, any organization, if you own the business or you don't own the business, I think that the nature of politics today, if you're in government, you're very short-term thinking to the next election. If you're in business and you're publicly traded, you're thinking about share prices and shareholder value. So I think a lot of business decisions done by leaders is about a short-term perspective and not looking, okay, how is this going to impact the next quarter, the next year, the next 5 years, and looking beyond short-term interests to longevity of an organization and longevity of staff and investing in staff.
Sorry. What leaders are impressing you these days? whether politically or even in a corporate standpoint?
Well, it depends what you're looking at. When I look at a leader that can really shape people's mind, you look at Obama or you look at Trudeau, here's two leaders that kind of came out of nowhere that everyone said, oh, they're never going to amount to much, and boom, in leadership roles. And regardless of your political stripe or what you agree or don't agree with them, is the ability to move people to action. Both of those leaders are quite phenomenal. In the workplace, it's often the leaders that are working on small teams in really difficult roles that I go, wow, they've really figured this out. And it's not a big name. It might be a guy who's a team leader at one of the uranium companies I work with in northern Saskatchewan, or it might be a team leader on a nursing ward. And you go, well, here's someone who manages to get people to deal with really crisis situations in a way that it doesn't damage their psyche or make them feel that they're not contributing in the way that they would like to. So often really good leadership is not about the big names, but it's about the big impacts.
What kind of value can WRLA members who attend these events from your speakers take away? Where's the value for that?
Well, I think with this organization, WRLA, is they do this wonderful trade show we're at today, and they incorporate some educational pieces like this morning, the workshop this morning. But I think because they have ongoing training through the year, I think they're not only focused on just as we talk about the commercial, the trading, the understanding the new products that all of these companies are talking about, but also how do we lift the profession so that people look to the association saying, if you're part of that association, we know you're a fair dealer, we know that you value customer service, that you value your staff and the communities you work in. So I think it's one of those things that it's an association that you want to attach your brand to. And I think that holds a lot of clout as the world becomes more competitive.